Throughout criminal history, there have been many messed up cases of people getting brutally hurt, tortured, murdered, killed, raped, and more, in all sorts of ways. However, none come to the same level as the case of a 16/17-year-old girl by the name of Junko Furuta. Junko was born on January the 18th, 1971 in Misato, Saitama, Japan. Now, I know that a lot of people have already covered this case, and I know that this case is pretty well known, kinda. Monetization will be off for this video. I don't want to make a video about something like this just to rack in money. I will leave a link to a website in which you can pay homage to Junko Furuta, as this is a very sad story that needs recognition. Furuta was just like any other normal girl around her age. She lived with her parents and her two brothers. As a teenager, she attended Yashio Minami High School and worked part-time at a factory. She was trying to save up money actually for a graduation trip that she had planned. And on top of that, she had also accepted a job at an electronics retailer where she planned to work after graduation. She was very well liked in high school. She had high grades, and she was even, to some extent, pretty popular. She even had dreams of becoming a singer one day, and a pretty big one at that, too. So, that's the protagonist of this story. Now we need to introduce the four evil boys who did the horrible things to her. Those four teenagers being Hiroshi Miyano, who was 18 at the time, Joe Ogura, who was 17, Nobuharu Minato, who was 16, and Yasushi Watanabe, who was 17. Now, these boys were pretty bad even from the get-go. They had engaged in crimes such as purse snatching, extortion, and even rape in Minato's house, and they were affiliated with the Yakuza. Miyano, the leader of the crime, had a history of problematic behavior ever since he was in elementary school, like shoplifting, damaging school property, etc., etc. A lot of these boys committed sex crimes and horrible behaviors towards women. And while their previous crimes have been pretty bad, this one would blow things out of the water. On the 25th of November, 1988, Miyano and Minato wandered around Misato with the intention of robbing and raping local women. At 8:30 p.m., they spotted Furuta riding her bike home after she had finished a shift at her job. Under Miyano's orders, Minato kicked Furuta off her bike and fled the scene. Miyano, under the pretense of witnessing the attack by coincidence, approached Furuta and offered to walk her home safely. He gained Furuta's trust, but unfortunately, things didn't go well, as he then raped her in the warehouse and again in a nearby hotel, threatening to kill her if she didn't comply. He then called upon his other friends and bragged to them about the rape. Ogura reportedly asked Miyano to keep her in captivity in order to allow numerous people to sexually assault her. The group had a history of gang rape and had recently kidnapped and raped another girl whom they released afterwards. Around 3 in the morning that day, Miyano took Furuta to a nearby park where Minato, Ogura, and Watanabe were waiting. They had learned her home address from a notebook in her backpack and told her they knew where she lived and that Yakuza members would kill her family if she attempted to escape. The four boys overpowered her, took her to a house in the Ayase district of Adachi, and gang raped her. The house, which was owned by Minato's parents, soon became their regular gang house, their gang hangout. The day was the 27th of November. Furuta's parents contacted the police about her disappearance. To discourage further investigation, the kidnappers forced her to call her mother 3 times to convince her that she had run away but was safe and staying with some friends. They also forced Furuta to stop the police investigation. When Minato's parents were present, Furuta was forced to act as his girlfriend, against her own will. They dropped this pretense when it became clear that Minato's parents would not report them to the police. Minato's parents later claimed they did not intervene because they were afraid as their own son was increasingly violent towards them. It was the night of the 28th of November. Miyano invited two other boys, Tetsuo Nakumara and Koichi Ihara. They went to the upstairs room where Junko was sitting, wearing a long-sleeved t-shirt and a skirt that Miyano had stolen from a clothing store a few days prior. They drank cough medicine pretending it was drugs and acted high. Furuta tried to run away, screaming in fear. Miyano grabbed her legs and Ihara put a pillow over her face. The parents were awakened and went to check on the scream, to which Minato told them it was nothing. The group then proceeded to gang rape Furuta. During this time, she was in a state of unconsciousness, staring at the ceiling without blinking. The group held Furuta captive in the Minato residence for 40 days, where they repeatedly beat, raped, and tortured her. They also invited other men and teenage boys home and encouraged them to take turns raping her. Now, this is the part where I'm going to list off all of the messed up stuff that happened to her. To sum it all up, she was kidnapped, kept captive in a house, was forced to pose as one of the boys' girlfriends. She was raped over 400 times, tortured for 44 days in a row, forced to call her parents and tell them she had run away. She was starved and malnutrition. They shaved her pubic hair. She was fed cockroaches to eat and urine to drink. She was forced to masturbate, forced to strip in front of others, burned with cigarette lighters. A bunch of foreign objects were shoved into her vagina/anus, including a lit match, a metal rod, a bottle, and force-fed her with large amounts of alcohol, milk, and water. She was also forced to smoke multiple cigarettes at once and inhale paint thinner. She was severely beat up countless times. She had her face held up against concrete and was jumped on. She had her hands tied to the ceiling and had her body used as a punching bag. Her nose filled up with so much blood that she could only breathe through her mouth. Dumbbells were dropped onto her stomach. She vomited when she tried to drink water because her stomach couldn't take anything. She tried to escape and was punished by being burnt by a cigarette on the arms. Flammable liquid was poured on her feet and legs and then lit on fire. Bottles were inserted into her anus, causing injury. She was unable to walk properly due to severe leg burns. She was beat with bamboo sticks. Fireworks were also inserted into her anus and lit. Her hands were smashed by weights and her fingernails were cracked. She was beaten with a golf club. Cigarettes were inserted into her vagina. She was beaten with iron rods repeatedly. She was left alone in the winter, forced outside to sleep in the balcony. Skewers of grilled chicken were inserted into her vagina and anus, causing bleeding. She nearly almost escaped this whole trauma, but one time she reached for the telephone to call for help. The boys caught her and ended the call for help. They punished her by taunting her with a candle flame and finally dousing her legs in lighter fluid and setting her on fire as punishment for trying to run away. She went into convulsions. The boys would later say that they thought she was faking the seizure. She was set on fire again, then put out. Hot wax was dripped onto her face. Her eyelids were burned by a cigarette lighter. She was stabbed with sewing needles in the chest area. Her left nipple was cut and destroyed with pliers. A hot light bulb was inserted into her vagina. Scissors were inserted into her vagina, which caused heavy bleeding. She was unable to urinate properly. Her injuries were actually so severe that it took over an hour for her to crawl downstairs and use the bathroom. Her eardrums were severely damaged. She had been abused so much that her brain size had been reduced to extreme measures. Day 40 of the torture, she begged her torturers to kill her and get it over with. Her body was completely mutilated, unable to move from the ground at that point. In one incident, apparently Miyano repeatedly burned Furuta's legs and arms with lighter fluid. By the end of December, Furuta was severely malnourished after being fed only a small amount of food and eventually only milk. Due to her severe injuries and affected burns, she became unable to go downstairs and became confined to the floor of Minato's room in a state of extreme weakness. Her appearance had changed a lot. Her face was so swollen that it was difficult to make out her features. Her body was also severely crippled, giving off a rotting smell that caused the four boys to lose sexual interest in her. As a result, the boys kidnapped and gang raped a 19-year-old woman who, like Furuta, was on her way home from work. After 44 days of torture and 44 days of hell, hope was finally coming, but in a very sad way. On January 4th, 1989, after losing a game of mahjong against a person the night before, Miyano decided to take his anger out on Furuta. Skill issue. By pouring lighter fluid on her body and setting her on fire. Furuta allegedly made attempts to put out the fire, but gradually became unresponsive. They then continued to punch her, ignited a candle onto her, and dripped hot wax on her face, placed 2 short candles on her eyelids, and forced her to drink her own urine. After she was kicked, she fell into a stereo unit and collapsed into a fit of convulsions from the pain and suffering. Since she was bleeding profusely and pus was emerging from her infected burns, the 4 boys covered their hands in plastic bags. They continued to beat her and dropped an iron exercise ball onto her stomach several times. The attack lasted approximately 2 hours. Furuta eventually had enough. She succumbed to her wounds and she died. Less than 24 hours after her death, Minato's brother called to tell him that Furuta appeared to be dead. The group then wrapped her body in blankets and shoved her into a travel bag. They then put her body in a 55-gallon drum and filled it with wet concrete. This is why this case is also referred to as the concrete-encased high school girl murder case. Around 8 p.m. that day, they loaded it and eventually disposed of the drum in a cement truck in Koto, Tokyo. During her captivity, Furuta had mentioned to her captor several times that she regretted not being able to watch the finale episode of Tonbo, which she unfortunately never was able to. Miyano found the videotape of the episode and placed it in the travel bag, not out of pity, but because he didn't want her to return as a ghost and haunt him. What a fucking sad loser. On the 23rd of January 1989, Miyano and Ogura were arrested for the gang rape of the 19-year-old girl whom they had kidnapped. On the 29th of March, 2 police officers came to interrogate them, as women's underwear had been found at their addresses. During the interrogation, Miyano believed that one of the officers was aware of his culpability in Furuta's murder. Thinking that Joe Ogura had confessed to the crimes against Furuta, Miyano told the police where to find Furuta's body. The police were initially puzzled by the confession, as they had been referring to the murder of a different woman and her 7-year-old son that had occurred 9 days prior to Furuta's abduction, a case which remains unsolved. So this guy essentially, out of fear of being caught, ended up getting himself in trouble. The police found the drum containing Furuta's body the following day. She was identified via fingerprints. On the 1st of April 1989, Ogura was arrested for a separate sexual assault and subsequently arrested again for Furuta's murder. The arrest of Watanabe Minato and Minato's brother followed suit. Several other accomplices who participated in abusing and raping Furuta were officially identified, including Nakamura and Ihara, who were charged with rape after the DNA was found on and inside her body. It was finally time for prosecution. And you might think that the boys who did this were going to get life in prison or something like the death penalty. But nope, they got let off easily. Hiroshi Miyano was sentenced to 17 years in prison, while also serving an additional 3 years on top of the 17. Yasushi Watanabe was originally sentenced 3 to 4 years in prison, but his sentence was actually upgraded for 5 to 7 years. Ogura was later also arrested for assaulting Takatoshi Ishono. He was arrested 8 years, and Nobuharu Minato received a 4 to 6 year sentence, which was then later resentenced for 5 to 9 years. But it's pretty wild how they weren't sentenced for a very long time. Furuta's parents were dismayed by the sentences received by their daughter's killers and won a civil suit against the parents of Minato, in whose home the crimes were convicted. Reportedly paid Junko Furuta's parents 50 million yen, or 370,000 US dollars in compensation, as ordered by the civil court after selling their family home. It is reported that Furuta's mother had to go on extreme dosages of medication, and it is also reported that while the case was being read out to the court, people in the crowd were so dismayed at what had just happened, at the horrors they were hearing, that some people were even fainting. Junko Furuta's funeral was held on the 2nd of April, 1989. One of her friend's memorial's address stated, "Jun-chan, welcome back. I have never imagined that we would see you again in this way. You must have been in so much pain, so much suffering. The happy we all made for the school festival looked really good on you. We will never forget you. I have heard that the principal has presented you with a graduation certificate. So we graduated together, all of us. Jun-chan, there is no more pain, no more suffering. Please rest in peace." Furuta's intended future employer presented her parents with the uniform she would have worn in the position she had accepted. The uniform was placed in her casket. At her graduation, Furuta's school principal presented her a high school diploma, which was given to her parents. The location near where Furuta's body was discovered has been developed since and is now Wakasu Park. At the time, Japanese people were concerned about a US-influenced epidemic of violent crime, what they called the American disease. At least 3 books have been written about the crime. An exploitation film about the incident was also made, for some odd reason. The case was also the inspiration for the film Concrete, which released in 2004, and the case also inspired the manga series 17 Sai. The case of Junko Furuta is quite a sad case, and without a doubt, probably the worst murder case ever in history. But you might have some questions. If so many people were involved in the case, why did nobody call the cops? Somebody at Minato's house actually called the cops, and they showed up, but they declined an invitation to inspect the house itself. These cops later got fired after the case. And another question is, why did this even happen in the first place? Well, there's this rumor that apparently Furuta rejected Miyano in school, and that's why this whole thing happened. But it's debatable. There's no proof that this actually happened. I've heard 2 versions of the story. One being where Furuta didn't know about her killers, and another where, this happened. Either way, this case truly remains one of the saddest in history. Japan has since upped their laws against stuff like this, against juvenile crime. Moral of the story here: evil comes in all sorts of shapes and sizes. Not everybody is evil, but evil can come from anybody.